Hello, welcome to Moving Between the Lines. I'm Jack George. This is my YouTube channel. Today is an analysis of the FFA Cup final, what happened, the tactics and stuff, how Melbourne Victory won, everything's going on. So yeah. Okay, so firstly, Melbourne Victory's build up, which is actually really interesting and something like, even maybe worth doing a sole video on, but it's not. Well, I'm doing this. So what they do is their fullbacks, these two, Garrier and Davidson, would remain really narrow and deep in build up. So say Garrier offers the ball here, and their wingers would come really wide. So what this does is Rojas comes here to receive the ball, and you can't, even if this angle is closed, because he's right-footed, we've talked about this before a little bit, because he's right-footed, he can bend it around Muller, the presser here for the Mariners, like that with the pass. And so when it comes to Rojas, you can't let Rojas gain speed. And this is the same with Falami on the other side. They're both, and Iconomidis on the bench, they're all really, really good one-on-one wingers. So you can't let them gain speed and kind of advance. So you have to come to them. And what this does, immediately you can see this space right here. There's so much. So then they all have to shift across, which is how defenses work. So these guys all shift across here as so. And the channel still is somewhat free, but then what happens is, and then Falami, instead of tucking in, remains wide. And this happened against Sydney a couple of weeks ago for Falami's goal, where I think it was Rojas had the ball in the counter-attack, and they all had to come across, because Farrell, if Rolls is over there, then all of a sudden there's all this space which D'Agostino can make that run in behind. So Rolls has to come across, Hall has to come across, Miller has to come across. They're all across, but it leaves Falami over here. And Davidson, instead of taking this position, would usually remain quite deep. And what would happen, I'll talk about that later actually. But so they kept their fullbacks really deep and sometimes coming a little bit narrow, not inverted into midfield, definitely not. But they just kept quite a flat back four, quite a flat two in midfield with Brillante. Able to get into this half space and use, I guess, just his energy, counter-pressing, which is a key part of Melbourne Victory, is the way he wins tackles up high. And it's it's really interesting because it's not a structure reliant on these two midfielders like you'd usually expect. It's more reliant on... It's not even reliant... It's more reliant on the structure itself in terms of just playing this pass out to one of the wingers, and the wingers being able to run 1v1 of the fullback. And, yeah. And so I'm not sure whether it was coached, probably was, but there was also a little bit of scaredy stuff from the Mariners there. So what happened is, so their midfield, instead of offering from the ball and receiving the ball in these, I guess, slightly dangerous positions when they can be pressed and lose it, they remained really high. So essentially they had this back four like this, and what they try to do is draw in Melbourne Victory and just play these kind of long balls over the top, and they became increasingly reliant on... just winning long balls, winning second balls. And the interesting thing about this is, so here, the ball comes to Maresh, and the theory is 1, 2, 3, all can counter-press that second ball if it doesn't go. So Muller comes in here against Garrier, and Bozanic can pull up here, and the whole point is that what they do, the reason they build up from the back before playing it long rather than just smacking it long straight away, is because it draws up Melbourne Victory's back line, and so it leaves more space in behind. There's more margin for error on the pass because Kellever's a fantastic sweeper keeper. So when you're playing these long balls, you want to draw these four in. The Melbourne Victory, they're pressing, you can see 4-2-4. If you draw these four in, all this space opens up in between the lines like here. So these two have to move up. I'm not going to actually move everyone up one by one. Actually, you know what, I can. So these guys all have to move up. And what it does is it leaves more space for like this kind of space over here, more space for a passing behind. However, it didn't work. I thought it was quite smart, but what mainly it was because up until the 60th minute, the Mariners just refused. So like Kai Rolls would often have the ball in these positions. Kai Rolls is a fantastic defender and quite good at progressive passing, but he refused to even play this ball out to Farrell because that Rojas could mark down the passing angle despite being left-footed, so it's not that dangerous. He would always come over and go, oh, not available, Bozanic is high, Muller is high, Farrell is, I don't want to pass it to him and play it back to Hall, who would then be forced to play long ball. So it would have been nice to see a little bit more variation, perhaps with Bozanic dropping in here, which then opens up space here, and Farrell can get a little bit further forward, although Farrell's not the best going forward. But it's just like the variation would have been nicer to see. But I did get the strategy. The Mariners very much... it was a bit disappointing because for me, I didn't feel like they were clearly the second best side in terms of coming into the game. But they played very much like they were I guess it doesn't help that it was an away game. But yeah, so it was a smart strategy, but I just don't think there was enough variation because, like I said, in the 60th minute they started doing really well, and I can show you they started doing these really smart passing combinations in the box. So they'd have the ball in quite good positions up here, and particularly with Urania would drop off in here, which he never did. Urania was barely involved, but he'd drop off here. Here's what's inside. This is with different players now. But he'd do these really smart 1-2s that would come off, and then he could take a shot away. He didn't get too many shots, but this is like 80th minute after they've conceded. So I think if they just come into the game with a little bit more confidence in themselves, going like, we can actually get a result here that's not from a scrappy 1-0 win, then they could have relied more. And I guess Melbourne Victory, I'll show this in a sec, did really well to prevent the Mariners from doing what they do best, which is counter-attacking and gaining their territory from here, rather than being in these positions not from build-up, but from a counter-attack from a long ball. So I guess with these two, Hamill and Spranovic are both very tall, win a lot of aerial duels, but it was only until the 80th minute before you start to see these 1-2 passing combinations that Urania started. Urania was dropping deep to pick up the ball, up until then it was quite rigid, and I mean these 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, the front four would pin Melbourne Victory back again, but to win the second balls, but surely that opens up the space, particularly in Melbourne Victory's 4-2-4 press, for passes in between the lines. But I guess, they had, Max Ballard on the bench instead of Steele, and Steele was starting, and Max Ballard's very comfortable receiving the ball on the turn in between the lines. Steele's more of a destroyer of a midfielder, and Bozanic is fantastic coming deeper to receive the ball, but can sometimes be a little bit dodgy, as deep-lying playmakers often are, when receiving the ball between the lines while being pressed with their back to goal. So in this position, particularly with someone like Brillante, who was, I guess, in some cases his direct opponent pressing him, that makes it hard. But yeah, just would be nice to see the Mariners. But it was a good game and everything. And nothing that was really interesting is, like I said, these two wingers, Rojas and Falami, and then Economides, and then Vulifly, were remaining really wide, and that was helpful for Melbourne Victory. But what they did is when they would run at the fullback, they'd have like this extremely fast galloping, like their attacks were so quick, from Geria, Davidson, sometimes Bremer, but he was more of like a floaty option. Brillante was the one. So like Rojas has to be running with the ball, and Geria would just make either this steaming run inside and kind of offer that option, or make the run outside with Rojas kind of advancing into the box position. Because what it does is it means like, so Muller's here and Farrell's kind of isolated 1v1. He's like, well, Farrell's a fantastic 1v1 defender, by the way, but anyway, that's not the point. Rojas is running at him, and then Carrot just comes steaming down the overlap, and it just makes it so easy to attack those 2v1s, and it's so quick, and their fullbacks are just really fast, so it works really well. Or he makes this underlapping run, which what this means is now Rojas can take the ball out here, and Rolls has to come across, or because usually with this is the whole point is, so they start back here, right? So they're not being tracked, because look, these four in their like the midfield block, and Maresh is focusing on marking this passing angle to Brillante, so he's not going to be tracked when doing so. So it essentially does become, it's a clear way of them making a 2v1 situation, because Gary, like, why would you, there's no point Muller coming and marking Gary in this position, because it then, everything. So, even if Hamill has the ball, there's no, well, maybe, but it depends on the block, if that makes sense. And then once Hamill plays this ball here, Muller naturally is going to come and block this field, because look how much space there is between those four for Brillante to come and receive the ball on the turn, for example. So Muller has to block this space. What I'm saying is it's very smart, because the fullbacks start deep where they're not picked up, and then create this 2v1 situation where they are comfortable underlapping here, giving Rojas space and time to deliver a cross, or advance at Farrell, or overlap here, and receive an easy pass in a clear 2v1 situation to put in across. And it's very smart. And another thing about these fullbacks, is when they're kind of sitting in this position, it means that the Mariners, who love to, their main threat against these, I guess, bigger teams with bigger quality players, because the Melbourne Victory, they gear their system towards the actual quality of their players, which is really interesting and actually quite fun to watch, because they essentially go, you guys are, it's very smart from Popovich, don't get me wrong, but it's reliant on the quality of the players for the system. But in the quality of these two wingers in particular, and economies, whoever's playing as one of the two wingers, and Brimmer. and everyone's important. But what the Mariners try to do on the break is play on the break. I can't speak right now, but I will soon, and I'm going to speak now again. So they play on the break, but if these guys are here to block these kind of angles, which Maresh and Urania love to get, they love to receive the ball here, which is where Davidson is literally standing, and then turn and run at the opposition. And when they're there, obviously they can't do that. And this wasn't a tactic geared towards the Mariners game. This is something also that's been done all season, really smart to try and stop counterattacks. Because when you have a front four of this quality with Margiotta, Cruz, Ikonomidis coming off the bench, that's insane. And you get like all of this quality, you don't really need other players to attack, if that makes sense, particularly with these smart runs. So it makes sense. Davidson is way more of an attacking fullback, however, and does that a lot. I'm only showing on the right side. Essentially, when they mark these positions, it makes it really hard for the Mariners to counterattack because there's this clear 1-2, 1-2-3, 2-3 block here. And it means that like the Mariners can't counterattack, which was their whole game plan. So it makes it hard for them to do that, and that's why the Mariners were so stifled and created so little before the Melbourne Victory's opening goal. And it's why Melbourne Victory won the cup final. So congratulations to them. And I'll be back soon.